The sword was already moving when Bruce Lee's eyes opened. Not his physical eyes. Those had been opened since he stepped through the sliding wooden door of Master Takeshi Yamamoto's private dojo in the Shinjuku district of Tokyo at 7:14 a.m. on March 16, 1972. His physical eyes had registered everything. The 12 tatami mats lining the perimeter, the polished hinoki cypress floor, worn smooth by 4 decades of sliding feet, the Kamidana shrine mounted on the north wall with a single white candle burning behind rice paper, the rack of 6 shinai bamboo practice swords, arranged vertically on the east wall in descending order of weight, and the man standing in the center of the room holding the 7th. No, the eyes that opened were the other ones. The ones Bruce Lee had spent his entire adult life training. The eyes that didn't look at what was happening but at what was about to happen. The eyes that read the body, the way a seismologist reads the earth. Not the quake, but the tremor before the quake. The imperceptible shift in pressure that tells you the ground is about to move before the ground knows it's moving. And those eyes opened at the precise moment that Master Takeshi Yamamoto, 58 years old, 7th Dan, holder of the All Japan Kendo Federation's highest active teaching rank, a man who had swung a shinai approximately 1.4 million times in his life by conservative estimate, decided to stop talking and start swinging. The sword was a shinai, 4 slats of dried Taiwanese bamboo bound together with a leather grip and a string running the length of the blade. It weighed approximately 510 grams. It was 120 centimeters long. In the hands of an amateur, it was a stick. In the hands of a 7th Dan who had trained since the age of 11, it was something closer to a natural extension of the nervous system, a length of bamboo that could travel from a resting position above the head to a full downward strike in approximately 0.3 seconds, generating enough force at the point of contact to fracture an unprotected collarbone, split the skin above the brow, or if delivered to the wrist with surgical precision, dislocate the small bones of the carpus. Yamamoto swung it at Bruce Lee's head. And to understand why, to understand how a 58-year-old master of one of Japan's most disciplined martial traditions came to swing a bamboo sword at the skull of a 31-year-old Chinese-American man he had known for less than 9 minutes, you need to go back to the previous afternoon, March 15, 1972. Tokyo. Bruce Lee had landed at Narita International Airport at 2:47 p.m. on a Japan Airlines flight from Hong Kong. It was his first visit to Japan. He was there for 2 reasons. The first was a meeting with Toho Studios about a potential co-production deal, a martial arts film that would pair him with a Japanese action star. The meeting was scheduled for March 17th. The second reason was personal. Bruce wanted to visit 3 dojos, 1 judo, 1 karate, 1 kendo. Not to fight, not to challenge, but to watch, to study, to absorb. It was what Bruce did. He collected movement the way other men collected stamps or coins or grievances. He went to places where bodies moved at high speeds under extreme discipline, and he watched the way the bodies solved problems, how they generated power, how they transferred weight, how they dealt with fear. He had done this his entire life. He had watched boxing matches in Oakland. He had watched savate demonstrations in Paris. He had watched capoeira in a park in San Francisco. He had watched Greco-Roman wrestling at a college gymnasium in Pasadena. And now he wanted to watch kendo, the way of the sword, in the country where it had been practiced for 400 years. The kendo dojo was arranged through a contact, a Japanese film executive named Hayashi, who had connections in the traditional martial arts community. Hayashi had called ahead. He had explained that an important martial artist from Hong Kong wished to observe a training session. The dojo master Yamamoto had agreed. He had not asked who the martial artist was. He had not been given a name. He had simply been told that a man wished to watch, and Yamamoto, a traditionalist who believed that observation was the first stage of learning, and that any man who wished to learn deserved the opportunity, said yes. What Hayashi did not tell Yamamoto was that the man was Bruce Lee. This was deliberate. Bruce had asked Hayashi not to use his name. By March 1972, Bruce Lee was the most famous martial artist in Asia. The big boss had broken every box office record in Hong Kong history. Fist of Fury was weeks from release, and would break those records again. Bruce's face was on magazine covers from Tokyo to Bangkok. If Yamamoto knew Bruce Lee was coming, the visit would become a performance, a demonstration, a photo opportunity, a spectacle. Bruce didn't want a spectacle. He wanted a floor, a sword, and a man who had swung it more times than Bruce had thrown a punch. He wanted to sit in the corner of a dojo and watch the way light travels through bamboo when it moves at speed. He wanted to be invisible. He was not going to be invisible. Bruce arrived at the dojo at 7:05 a.m. on March 16th. The dojo was on the second floor of a narrow 3-story building on a side street in Shinjuku, wedged between a noodle shop and a printing press. The staircase was steep, wooden, and it creaked on every third step. The air smelled of cedar oil and old sweat, the permanent olfactory signature of any space where human beings have exerted themselves daily for decades. At the top of the stairs, a sliding door. Bruce removed his shoes, black leather, plain, worn, and placed them beside 4 other pairs already lined along the wall. He slid the door open. The room was rectangular, approximately 40 feet by 25 feet. The floor was hinoki cypress, pale, smooth, with a faint golden grain that caught the morning light coming through 2 high narrow windows on the south wall. The ceiling was low, perhaps 8 feet, supported by dark wooden beams. The walls were bare except for the kamedana on the north wall, the shinai rack on the east wall, and a single framed piece of calligraphy on the west wall. 3 characters that Bruce recognized as Ken Zenichi. Sword and Zen are one. There were no mirrors, no padding, no modern equipment of any kind. The room looked almost exactly as it had looked when Yamamoto's father had built it in 1934. Yamamoto was already in the room. He stood at the center, facing the kamedana, holding a shinai vertically in front of his body, in the chudan no kamae, the middle guard position, the most fundamental stance in kendo, the sword held at sternum height, with the tip pointing at the opponent's throat. He wore a dark indigo kikogi, the heavy cotton training jacket, and hakama, the wide-legged trousers that concealed foot movement and made the practitioner appear to glide rather than step. His feet were bare, his hair was grey, cut short, receding at the temples. His face was lean, deeply lined around the eyes and mouth. The face of a man who had spent 5 decades concentrating on a single point in space. The distance between the tip of his sword and the body of his opponent. Yamamoto did not turn around when Bruce entered. He knew someone had entered. The creak of the door, the shift in air pressure, the faint sound of bare feet on cypress. But in kendo, you do not turn to greet. You finish what you are doing. Yamamoto was performing suburi, solo practice swings. He raised the shinai above his head, high guard, jodan no kamae, and brought it down in a single vertical arc. The sound it made was not what Bruce expected. Bruce had heard bamboo weapons before. He had trained with Filipino sticks, nunchaku, bowl staffs. Bamboo made a whooshing sound, a displacement of air. But Yamamoto's swing did not whoosh. It cracked. A sharp, dense, percussive sound, like a whip breaking the sound barrier, except the shinai was not breaking any barrier. It was simply moving so fast through the air that the bamboo slats vibrated against each other at a frequency that produced a sound closer to a gunshot than a swing. The sound filled the room and died in the same instant. Yamamoto swung again and again, each swing identical, each crack identical. The intervals between swings were exactly 1.8 seconds. Bruce counted them involuntarily, the way he counted everything, the way his brain had been trained to pass time into units, so small that most people didn't know they existed. 1.8 seconds, raise, strike, crack. 1.8 seconds, raise, strike, crack. The rhythm was mechanical. Not in the sense of being robotic, in the sense of being a machine that had been calibrated over 47 years of daily practice until the margin of error had been reduced to 0. Bruce stood near the door and watched. He did not sit. He did not move to the spectator area along the south wall. He stood and he watched, and his eyes, the other eyes, the ones that read bodies, began to catalogue. He noted the grip first. Yamamoto held the shinai with both hands, left hand at the base of the handle, right hand approximately 1 fist width above it. The left hand did not grip, it cradled. The fingers were firm but not tight. Bruce could see the slight gaps between the index and middle finger, the middle and ring finger. This was not a power grip, this was a control grip. The power came from somewhere else. He noted the shoulders next. Yamamoto's deltoids did not engage during the downswing. This was counterintuitive. In boxing, in karate, in almost every striking art Bruce had studied, the shoulder was the primary engine. But in kendo, the shoulders stayed quiet. The engine was lower, the hips, the abdomen, the tendon, the center point, 2 inches below the navel, that Japanese martial arts treated as the source of all force. Yamamoto's downswing originated at the tendon, traveled up through the spine as a rotational wave, passed through the chest without engaging the pectorals, flowed through the shoulders without engaging the deltoids, and arrived at the wrists which snapped forward at the terminal moment of the swing, adding a final acceleration that turned a controlled arc into an explosive strike. The wrist snap was the crack. It was the moment the bamboo slats compressed against each other under centrifugal force and produced that gunshot sound, and it happened in the final 0.04 seconds of a swing that lasted approximately 0.3 seconds total. Bruce recognized the principle. It was the same principle as his 1-inch punch, power generated not from the nearest muscle but from the most distant one, traveling through the body as a sequential chain of accelerations, each segment adding velocity to the segment before it, so that the final point of contact, the fist, the tip of the shinai, carried the accumulated force of the entire kinetic chain. Different art, different weapon, same physics. And that recognition, that instant of seeing his own principle reflected in a completely different discipline, is what made Bruce Lee do something he had not planned to do. He was supposed to watch. He was supposed to sit quietly and observe and absorb and leave without disturbing the dojo or the master or the tradition. That was the plan. But Bruce Lee was never very good at plans when physics was involved. He said, "Your power comes from your center, not your arms." He said it in English. Yamamoto did not speak English, but Yamamoto understood the interruption. He stopped mid-swing. The shinai froze at the apex of its arc, held above his head in Jodan position, motionless. Yamamoto turned. For the first time, the two men looked at each other. Yamamoto saw a man who was 5 feet 7 inches tall, wearing a plain black cotton jacket with a mandarin collar, dark trousers and bare feet. The man was lean to the point of appearing fragile. The forearms were disproportionately developed relative to the upper arms. The waist was impossibly narrow, and the shoulders, while broad for the frame, carried no bulk. The man's posture was unusual. He stood with his weight slightly forward, distributed 60% on the front foot and 40% on the rear, a fighting stance disguised as a standing position. And his eyes were locked on the shinai above Yamamoto's head, with an intensity that Yamamoto had only ever seen in one context, the eyes of a man in the first second of a match, the second before the first strike, the second when every nerve in the body is firing simultaneously, because the brain has registered that something dangerous is about to happen. Yamamoto lowered the shinai slowly. He said, in Japanese, "Who are you?" Hayashi, who had been standing near the door, stepped forward and answered. He said the visitor's name. Yamamoto's expression did not change when he heard the name Bruce Lee. He had heard the name, he had seen a photograph in a Tokyo newspaper, a man kicking another man in the chest on a movie set. He had thought, at the time, what many traditional Japanese martial artists thought about Bruce Lee in 1972, that the man was an actor, a performer, a man who simulated combat for cameras and audiences and profit, not a man who understood combat, not a man who had spent 47 years swinging a sword at 7 a.m. in a room with no mirrors and no audience and no applause. Kendo was not performance. Kendo was the way of the sword, and the way of the sword was not something you learned by kicking people on a movie set. Yamamoto said, in Japanese, a sentence that Hayashi would translate and that Bruce Lee would remember for the rest of his life. He said, "You are just an actor. Why are you in my dojo?" The room went still. Not quiet, still. The difference is that quiet is the absence of sound. Still is the absence of everything. Sound, movement, breath, intention. The candle on the kamedana flickered once, and then held. Hayashi's hand, which had been rising to adjust his tie, stopped mid-motion. The dust in the 2 shafts of morning light from the south windows seemed to suspend itself, each mote frozen in its column of gold. Bruce heard the translation. His face did not change. His posture did not shift. His breathing, 4 counts in, 4 counts out, did not alter. He looked at Yamamoto. He looked at the shinai in Yamamoto's right hand. He looked at the rack on the east wall, where 6 more shinai waited in their vertical arrangement. Then Bruce said, and Hayashi translated, "I am here to learn, but I think you need to see something first." Yamamoto's eyes narrowed. In Kendo culture, a guest does not tell the master what the master needs. A guest bows, a guest sits, a guest watches, A guest does not speak unless spoken to, and certainly does not suggest that a 7th Dan Master with 47 years of daily practice needs to see anything from anyone, let alone an actor from Hong Kong who was not wearing a hokama, was not holding a shinai, and was not, by any definition that Yamamoto's 47 years of training recognized, a swordsman. Yamamoto did not respond with words. He responded the way a kendo master responds when words are insufficient. He raised the shinai, not to the middle guard, not to the ready position, to Jodan, the high guard, the attack position, the position that in kendo signals a single intention: I am about to strike, and I am not going to stop. And then Yamamoto swung. Not a practice swing, not a saburi at 1.8-second intervals with controlled deceleration. A men uchi, a full-speed downward strike aimed at the crown of the head, the most fundamental and most dangerous attack in kendo, the strike that in feudal Japan, with a live katana instead of a bamboo shinai, would split a man's skull from crown to jaw. In kendo training, this strike is delivered to a padded helmet, the men which absorbs the force and distributes it across the reinforced steel grille and quilted padding. Bruce Lee was not wearing a men. He was not wearing any protective equipment. He was wearing a cotton jacket and bare feet, and a bamboo sword was traveling toward the top of his skull at approximately 45 miles per hour. And this is the moment that Hayashi later described to a film industry colleague over dinner in Roppongi, a description that was recorded in a diary entry dated March 19, 1972, and translated from Japanese into English by a graduate student at Waseda University in 2009, as the moment I understood that Bruce Lee was not an actor, because Bruce Lee did not step back, he did not flinch, he did not raise his arms to block, he did not close his eyes. He did something that Yamamoto had never seen any person do in 47 years of kendo, in training, in competition, in demonstrations, in the 6 times he had been attacked on the street by drunks who didn't know what the bag on his back contained. Bruce stepped forward, into the swing, toward the blade, toward the exact point in space where the shinai would reach maximum velocity, approximately 18 inches before the point of contact with the skull. The sweet spot of the arc where the bamboo slats compressed against each other and the wrist snap added its final acceleration, and the crack would come, that gunshot sound. Except this time it would not crack against empty air. It would crack against bone. Bruce stepped forward and to the left, not a large step, 7 inches, a distance so small that Yamamoto's eyes, which were trained to track the full range of human evasion, the long backward leap, the lateral roll, the ducking crouch, could not immediately classify what had happened. The step was below the threshold of what 47 years of kendo had taught Yamamoto to expect from a human body under attack. It was not evasion. Evasion moves away from the weapon. Bruce moved toward it. It was not blocking. Blocking intercepts the weapon's path. Bruce did not touch the shinai. It was something else, something that Yamamoto's training had no word for, because the tradition of kendo had never needed a word for it, because no one in 400 years of the art had done it. Bruce moved into the space between the sword and the swordsman. There is a corridor in every swing. Every weapon, sword, bat, fist, club, travels along an arc, and that arc has a radius, and at the center of that radius is the body of the person swinging. The further from the center, the faster the weapon moves. The closer to the center, the slower it moves. At the very center, the pivot point, the axis of rotation, the weapon has 0 velocity relative to the body that swings it. This is the dead zone, the place where the weapon is not yet a weapon, the place where force has been committed but has not yet arrived. Bruce Lee stepped into the dead zone. He covered 7 inches in approximately 0.11 seconds. By the time Yamamoto's shinai reached the bottom of its arc, the point where it would have struck Bruce's skull if Bruce had remained standing where he was, Bruce was no longer there. He was inside the arc. He was standing approximately 14 inches from Yamamoto's chest, inside the reach of the sword, inside the range of the swing, in a space that the shinai could not reach because the shinai was on the wrong side of its own geometry. The tip had already passed Bruce's left ear. The crack came, but it cracked against nothing. The sword hit air. The sound died in the empty space where Bruce's head had been 1/10 of a second earlier, and now Bruce Lee was inside. Yamamoto's arms were still extended from the follow-through. The shinai was at the bottom of its arc, pointing toward the floor at approximately 30 degrees. the natural resting position of a completed men uchi. His weight was forward, 65% on his front foot, because a full kendo strike commits the body to forward momentum. His center of gravity was ahead of his base of support. He was, for approximately 0.4 seconds, structurally vulnerable. His arms were low, his sword was spent, his balance was committed, and Bruce Lee was standing 14 inches from his sternum. What happened in the next 5 seconds would be described differently by the 3 people who witnessed it. Hayashi, standing near the door, saw it from behind and to the right. He later said Bruce's hands moved like a man sorting cards, very fast, very flat, no wasted space. Yamamoto himself, in a conversation with a fellow kendo instructor 3 weeks later, said he felt Bruce's left hand touch the inside of his right wrist before he consciously registered that the strike had missed. The third witness was a 19-year-old student of Yamamoto's named Kenji Sato, who had been kneeling in Caesar position against the south wall, waiting for morning practice to begin, and who saw the entire sequence from a lateral angle at floor level. Chen Wei's account, given in a 2011 interview with a Japanese martial arts magazine, is the most detailed. According to Sato, Bruce's left hand made contact with the inside of Yamamoto's right wrist. Not a grab, not a strike, but a press, a redirection, the lightest possible application of force at the most structurally advantageous angle. Bruce pressed inward and downward on the wrist, using Yamamoto's own follow-through momentum as a lever. Yamamoto's right hand, which was already moving downward from the completed strike, continued downward, but now its trajectory was being guided, bent, redirected by approximately 15 degrees from its natural path. 15 degrees is almost nothing. It is the difference between a straight line and a very slightly curved line. But 15 degrees applied at the wrist translates to approximately 4 inches of displacement at the tip of a 120 centimeter sword, and 4 inches when the grip is already loose from follow-through and the fingers are already partially open from the release phase of the swing, is enough. The shinai rotated in Yamamoto's hands. Not violently, not with the dramatic clatter of a weapon being knocked away. It rotated the way a pen rotates when you roll it between your thumb and forefinger, smoothly, quietly, with a kind of mechanical inevitability. Yamamoto's fingers, which had held a shinai for 47 years, which had gripped and released and re-gripped bamboo approximately 1.4 million times, opened, not because they were forced open, because the angle of the sword in his hands had been changed by 15 degrees, and at that angle, the grip was no longer anatomically sustainable. The fingers opened because physics told them to. Bruce's right hand was waiting. It had been waiting since before the swing began. It closed around the midshaft of the shinai, not the handle, the midshaft, approximately 60 centimeters from the tip, and in a single motion, drew the weapon out of Yamamoto's loosening fingers, the way a man draws a thread from a loose hem. There was no jerk, no pull, no contest of strength. The sword simply transferred from one man's hands to another man's hand, and the transfer took less time than the blink of a human eye. Bruce Lee was now holding Yamamoto's shinai. 6 seconds. From the moment the sword began its downward arc, to the moment Bruce held it in his right hand. 6 seconds. Yamamoto stood with his arms still partially extended, his fingers still partially open, his weight still forward, staring at his own empty hands, the way a man stares at a glass that has just been removed from his grip by someone he did not see approach. The room was silent. Not the silence of awe, not yet. The silence of incomprehension. Sato, kneeling against the south wall, later said his first thought was that he had missed something, that he had blinked or looked away, and a piece of the sequence had occurred outside his field of vision. Because what he had seen did not assemble into a coherent narrative. A man had swung a sword, another man had stepped toward it, and then the sword was in the second man's hand. The middle, the mechanism, the technique, the physical explanation was absent. It was as if the film had been cut. Frame 1, sword in motion. Frame 2, sword in a different hand. The intervening frames had been removed. Bruce stood still. He held the shinai loosely at his side, the tip pointing toward the floor. He did not assume a fighting stance. He did not raise the weapon. He did not speak. He waited. Yamamoto stared at his empty hands for approximately 3 seconds. Then he looked at Bruce. Then he looked at his empty hands again. Then he did something that, according to Sato, he had never done in the dojo in the 19 months that Sato had trained under him. He took a step backward, not a retreat, not a tactical withdrawal. A single step, perhaps 8 inches, that carried no martial intention whatsoever. It was the step of a man who needs distance, not from a threat, but from a thought. The step of a man whose body needs to create space, so his mind can process what just happened to his hands. Bruce extended the shinai back toward Yamamoto. Handle first, the universal gesture of returning a weapon with respect. Yamamoto looked at the offered handle. He did not take it, not immediately. He looked at Bruce's face. He looked at Bruce's left hand, the hand that had pressed his wrist and changed 15 degrees and ended 40 years. He looked at the fingers. They were relaxed, open. The hand of a man who was not fighting and had never been fighting, even in the moment when a bamboo sword was traveling toward his skull at 45 miles per hour. Yamamoto said one word, in Japanese, quietly. Not to Bruce, not to Hayashi, not to Sato, to himself. Hi-ai, fast. Then he took the shinai. What happened next was something that neither Hayashi nor Sato expected. Yamamoto did not ask Bruce to leave. He did not challenge him again. He did not reassert the dominance of the dojo, or the tradition, or the 47 years. He placed the shinai on the floor horizontally, parallel to the north wall, with the tip pointing east. In Kendo, this gesture has a specific meaning. It means, the lesson is mine to receive. Then Yamamoto sat down, not in the casual, comfortable way of a man taking a seat. In Caesar, the formal kneeling position, knees together, back straight, hands on the thighs, head level. The position of a student. A 58-year-old 7th Dan Master, in his own dojo, on a floor his father had built, sat in the student's position and looked at Bruce Lee and waited. Bruce did not sit down. He stood for a moment, looking at Yamamoto, and something crossed his face that Sato later described as the expression of a man who has been given a gift he did not ask for. Then Bruce spoke. Hayashi translated. Your strike is perfect, Bruce said. The speed is perfect. The angle is perfect. The commitment is absolute. That is why I was able to take the sword. Yamamoto frowned. Hayashi translated the frown. I don't understand. If it was perfect, how did you take it? Bruce said. Because perfection is predictable. Your sword travels the same arc every time. Same speed. Same angle. Same wrist snap at the same millisecond. I counted 8 swings before you turned around. Every swing was identical. Your body has done this movement so many times that it cannot do it differently. It has become automatic, and anything automatic can be timed. Hayashi translated. Yamamoto listened. His jaw worked slightly, the muscle at the hinge of the mandible tightening and releasing, the physical signature of a man who is hearing something that contradicts a fundamental belief and is deciding whether to reject it or absorb it. Bruce continued. In Kendo, you practice until the sword becomes part of the body, until there is no thought between intention and action. This is beautiful. This is mastery. But it is also a cage, because if I can watch you swing 8 times and predict the 9th, if I can identify the 0.04 second window where your wrist snaps and your grip loosens, then your mastery becomes my weapon, not yours. The silence that followed lasted 7 seconds. Sato counted them. He counted them because he was 19 years old, and he was watching the man who had taught him everything he knew about the sword sit on the floor and listen to a stranger dismantle the philosophy of that teaching in 2 paragraphs. And Sato did not know whether to feel anger or revelation. Yamamoto spoke. His voice was low, measured, the voice of a man who has decided, you are saying that discipline is a weakness. Bruce shook his head before Hayashi finished translating. He had understood the tone, if not the words. When Hayashi finished, Bruce said, no, I am saying that discipline without variation is a pattern, and a pattern can be read. The greatest swordsman is not the one who swings perfectly every time. The greatest swordsman is the one who has 1,000 perfect swings, and you never know which one is coming. Yamamoto's eyes changed, not widened, deepened. The frown dissolved, the jaw muscle released. Something moved behind his eyes that Sato described as the look of a man remembering something he knew when he was young and had forgotten. Yamamoto stood. He picked up the shinai from the floor. He assumed Chudan no Kamae, the middle guard, the default position. And then he did something that Bruce Lee did not expect. He attacked again, but this time he did not swing the same mentuchi. He feinted high, the shinai rose toward Jodan, the beginning of the same overhead strike, and then redirected. Instead of coming down vertically, the sword swept laterally, a kote uchi, a strike aimed at the wrist. It was fast, it was precise, and it was different. Bruce moved, not the same 7-inch step, a different movement, a slight backward sway of the torso, no more than 3 inches, just enough to let the tip of the shinai pass the space where his forearm had been. He didn't try to disarm, he didn't counter, he let it pass. Yamamoto attacked again, a duichi, a lateral strike aimed at the torso. Bruce rotated his hips, turning his body sideways, presenting the thinnest possible profile. The shinai cut air. Again, a suki, a thrust aimed at the throat. Bruce tilted his chin upward by 2 degrees and shifted his weight to his rear foot. The tip of the shinai passed beneath his jaw by less than an inch. 3 attacks, 3 different techniques, 3 misses. But these were not the misses of the first exchange, the embarrassing, deconstructed physics lesson misses that had left Yamamoto holding empty air. These were close, these were dangerous. These were the attacks of a man who had heard what Bruce said about variation and had immediately, instinctively, applied it. Bruce smiled, the first smile of the morning, a small, genuine expression that started at the corners of his mouth and did not reach his eyes because his eyes were still working, still reading, still cataloguing the new data. The feints, the angles, the changed rhythm. He said, through Hayashi, better. Yamamoto lowered the shinai. He breathed, 1 deep breath. Then he said something that Hayashi translated with visible surprise on his face. Teach me 2 words in a dojo where no outsider had ever taught, from a 7th Dan who had never been a student since the age of 11, directed at a man he had called just an actor less than 4 minutes earlier. Bruce Lee spent the next 90 minutes in that dojo. He did not pick up a shinai. He never held a sword again that morning. What he did was talk. Through Hayashi, in fragments and demonstrations and hand gestures that transcended translation, Bruce explained to Yamamoto the concept of broken rhythm, the principle at the core of Jeet Kune that stated, the most dangerous attack is the one that arrives at an unexpected tempo. He explained interception, the idea that the optimal moment to counter is not after the attack lands, not during the attack but in the preparatory phase. In the instant between intention and action, in the 0.04-second gap where the body telegraphs what the mind has decided. He demonstrated with his hands, his feet, his body, how a fighter could train not to eliminate patterns, but to have so many patterns that the opponent could not predict which one was coming next. Yamamoto listened with the intensity of a man who was rebuilding a house while still living in it. He asked questions, he swung the shinai, he tried variations, he failed, he tried again, he failed differently. He asked more questions. At one point, according to Sato, Yamamoto laughed. A short, surprised, almost involuntary laugh, the laugh of a man who has just discovered a room in his own house that he didn't know existed. At 8:47 a.m., Bruce bowed. Not a formal kendo bow, a respectful inclination of the head, the bow of a man who has received as much as he has given. Yamamoto bowed in return. A full bow, deeper than any bow Sato had seen him give to any student, any visiting master, any judge at any tournament. The bow of a man acknowledging that something had entered his dojo that morning, that his dojo had needed for a very long time. Bruce Lee left the building at 8:52 a.m. He walked down the creaking staircase, put on his black leather shoes, and stepped into the noise and sunlight of Shinjuku. Hayashi followed. In the car back to the hotel, Hayashi asked Bruce what he thought of Yamamoto. Bruce was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "He is the best I have ever seen with a weapon." And in 90 minutes he became better. Most men cannot do that. Most men hear that their strength is also their weakness, and they stop listening. He listened. That is rarer than speed. Yamamoto continued to teach kendo for another 17 years. He retired in 1989. In a 1985 interview with a Tokyo martial arts publication, he was asked about the most important lesson he had ever learned. He paused for a long time. Sato, who was present as a now senior instructor, said the pause lasted almost 15 seconds. Then Yamamoto said, "A man came to my dojo once. He was not a swordsman. He took my sword from my hands in the time it takes to exhale. He did not do it to defeat me. He did it to show me something about my own training that I could not see from inside it. I've thought about that morning every day since. The interviewer asked who the man was. Yamamoto said, "It doesn't matter who he was. What matters is what he saw. He saw that my discipline had become my blindfold, that my perfection had become my cage, and he opened the cage in 6 seconds. He never said Bruce Lee's name. He didn't need to. By 1985, there was only one man in the world who could take a sword from a 7th Dan Kendo Master's hands with a 7-inch step and a 15-degree press on the wrist. Only one man who could walk into a dojo in Shinjuku at 7:14 in the morning, barefoot, unarmed, 135 pounds, and leave 90 minutes later, having changed the way a 58-year-old master understood his own art. Only one man who was called just an actor and answered with his hands. His name was Bruce Lee. And on a quiet morning in Tokyo, in a dojo built by a dead man's father, on a floor worn smooth by 40 years of sliding feet, he taught a swordsman that the most dangerous weapon in the world is not a sword. It is the man who can see yours before you swing it.